Some disappearances arrive loudly. Doors slam, voices rise, footsteps run, there is chaos, and there are witnesses, but others come quietly, almost politely, slipping into the world like a breath being held too long. Tina Satchwell's disappearance belonged to the second kind. It made no noise at all. On the morning she vanished, nothing seemed unusual. The sky above the small English coastal town was pale and indifferent, the kind of grey that had learned to live there permanently. Neighbors went about their routines without urgency. Cars passed, dogs barked once or twice, curtains moved just enough to suggest life behind them. Tina's house stood exactly where it always had, modest, tidy, unremarkable. It did not announce that it was about to become a crime scene. It did not warn anyone that it was about to keep a secret. Tina was the sort of woman people later described as ordinary, as if ordinary lives mattered less once they were lost. She was warm without being loud, kind without performing it, dependable in ways that never make headlines. She liked her routines. Morning tea, the radio on low volume, lists written carefully, crossed out neatly. She had planned small plans, human plans, lunch with a friend, a phone call she meant to return, a life that did not ask for attention, only continuation. That was the cruelty of it. Nothing in her life suggested an ending. When people later tried to pinpoint the exact moment Tina disappeared, they found only gaps. There was no last dramatic sighting, no final argument heard through thin walls, no desperate message sent from a phone. There was only a quiet pause where her presence should have been, a missed call, an unanswered knock, the subtle shift from she's busy to that's strange. By the time concern arrived, it was already too late for certainty. At first, those closest to her believed what people often believe because it hurts less, that she had stepped away for a while, that she needed space, that she would call soon, laughing at the worry she had caused. Adults disappear all the time, they told themselves. Lives are complicated, choices are personal, but Tina had not taken her purse. The jacket she always wore when she went out was folded neatly inside. When police were first contacted, the response was cautious but unalarmed. There were questions. Had Tina ever left before? Was there tension in her marriage? A woman gone is often assumed to have chosen it. He said they had argued before, like any couple, but nothing serious. He said she must have left on her own, and at the time no one could prove otherwise. Days passed, then weeks. Tina did not call. She did not access her bank accounts. She did not contact friends. She did not surface somewhere new, reinvented and free. Instead, her absence grew heavier, settling into the house she had once filled with quiet life. Inside that house, everything remained almost exactly as she had left it. This is where the story begins to darken, not with violence, but with stillness. Her belongings sat untouched. Her toothbrush remained dry. Her favorite mug waited in the cupboard, unchipped and unused. The air inside the house did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, as though someone might return at any moment and resume breathing. People underestimate how disturbing that kind of emptiness can be. Friends came by at first. They stood in doorways, unsure where to put their hands, unsure how to speak about someone who might still be alive. Conversations lowered themselves automatically, as if Tina was sleeping in the next room. They said things like when she comes back and she just needs time. But time has a way of revealing lies gently. Then all at once, as weeks became months, hope began to thin. The town adjusted, as towns always do. Life continued around the absence. The bakery opened, the post arrived, children grew taller. Tina's name was spoken less often, not because she was forgotten, but because speaking it hurt. David remained in the house. This detail would later feel unbearable. At the time, it was simply practical. It was his home too. He continued with his routines. He answered questions politely. He waited. What no one understood yet was that waiting can be its own kind of performance. Investigators came and went. They searched what they thought made sense. They followed the rules of logic shaped by past cases. They looked outward. They looked forward. They assumed movement. They did not yet look down. There is something uniquely cruel about a disappearance without answers. Death allows grief to settle into shape. Disappearance leaves it formless, constantly shifting, impossible to hold. Tina's family lived inside that uncertainty, waking each day with the same question pressing against their chests. Is she alive somewhere, suffering, or gone forever, unreachable? The human mind will choose hope even when hope hurts. Years passed. The case grew quiet, then quieter. Files were archived, officers transferred. Tina's name slipped into that category. Law enforcement never names out loud. Unresolved did not mean unsolved forever. It meant unsolved for now, and for now stretched endlessly. The house, meanwhile, remained. People passed it without thinking. They had no reason to. It looked like any other home. Windows intact, door painted, stairs inside that lead upward, not downward, not into suspicion. But houses remember things differently than people do. Walls hold sound, floors absorb weight, spaces keep what they are given. And beneath those stairs, time was not passing the way it should have been. When the case was eventually reopened, it was not because of a single dramatic revelation. It was because time, slowly and patiently, erodes certainty. New eyes saw old assumptions and found them weak. The story of a woman who simply walked away no longer fit the silence she left behind. Someone finally asked the question that should have been asked sooner. What if Tina never left at all? That question would change everything. But in this first chapter of her story, before the truth clawed its way into daylight, there was only a woman who vanished quietly, a house that stood without accusation, and a world that moved on because it did not know what else to do. Tina Satchwell did not disappear loudly enough for the world to stop, and that is what made it possible for the truth to stay hidden for so long. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. Houses are supposed to forget. That is what we tell ourselves. People come and go, walls are repainted, carpets replaced, lives layered over lives until the past dissolves into dust. But some houses do not forget. They observe. They observe. They keep what they are given. The house where Tina Satchwell lived became very quiet after she vanished, but it did not become empty. David Satchwell remained there, moving through the rooms with practiced familiarity. He slept in the same bed. He ate at the same table. He walked up and down the same stairs every day, his feet following a path worn smooth by repetition. To outsiders, it looked like grief expressed in routine, a man clinging to normalcy after loss. He told people he was waiting for Tina to come home. He said he believed she would. He spoke softly, carefully, as though afraid of disturbing something fragile. Police noted his cooperation. He answered questions without resistance. He did not panic. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. In a world where guilt is often imagined as loud and erratic, David appeared almost reassuringly ordinary. But ordinary can be deceptive. Investigators reviewed the timeline again and again. Tina had last been seen inside the house. There was no confirmed sighting of her leaving. No neighbor remembered seeing her walk away. No CCTV footage captured her movements. At the time, these gaps were brushed aside. Cameras miss things. People forget. Lives are busy, yet the gaps remained. David's statements never changed. That consistency was initially interpreted as honesty. Only later would it feel rehearsed. He said Tina left after an argument. He said she needed space. He said she had talked about leaving before, though no one else could remember her saying such a thing. Subtle contradictions lived inside his words, but they were quiet ones. Dates that shifted slightly, details that softened over time, emotions that felt muted, as if they were being described rather than felt. Still, suspicion did not fully take hold. Time dulled urgency. Years without answers can convince people that there are none. The house itself was searched early on, but not deeply. There was no blood, no signs of struggle. No broken furniture, no obvious disturbance. Everything appeared in place, as though life had simply paused and never resumed. It is difficult to investigate what looks normal. What investigators did not understand then was that some crimes are designed to look like nothing happened at all. David continued to live alone. He made small changes over time, repairs, improvements, nothing dramatic. Nothing that demanded attention. The stairs remained where they always had been, leading upward, dividing space, blending into the architecture of the home. People assume that hiding something requires chaos, digging, panic, noise. But the most effective concealment often happens slowly, quietly, wrapped in routine. Neighbors noticed little. Why would they? He waved when he saw them. He exchanged pleasantries. He existed in the same rhythms as everyone else. If grief showed on him, it was understated, acceptable, easy to ignore. Years passed like this. Tina's family lived with unanswered questions that never stopped asking themselves. Birthdays came and went. Holidays arrived with empty chairs. Hope shifted shape, shrinking into something fragile and painful. They imagined her somewhere else, alive but unreachable. They imagined worse things too, and then forced themselves not to. Meanwhile, the house aged, paint faded, corners gathered dust. The silence inside deepened, becoming something heavy, something aware. Every step David took echoed through spaces that remembered Tina's presence. The stairs bore his weight daily, patient and unremarkable. It is unsettling to consider how close the truth can be to us without our knowing it, how often we pass by it, how docilely we accept surfaces. When the case was eventually reviewed by fresh eyes, the questions came differently. They were no longer focused on where Tina might have gone, but on whether she had gone anywhere at all. The idea felt uncomfortable, almost impolite. To suspect the house itself felt like accusing an object. But houses do not lie. Investigators returned, not with urgency, but with curiosity. They noticed what had once seemed insignificant. Renovation records, structural changes, inconsistencies that had been invisible before. David's calm now felt less reassuring, his patience less natural. They listened again to old interviews, this time not for what was said, but for what was avoided. They noticed how often David spoke around details rather than through them, how his concern never deepened, never cracked, never lost control. Grief, they knew, is rarely so tidy. The house was searched again, more thoroughly this time. Every room, every surface. Still, nothing obvious presented itself. And yet, the unease grew rather than faded. Someone finally stood at the staircase longer than necessary. It was an ordinary staircase, carpeted, narrow, leading upward as expected. But beneath it lay a space that was not meant to be noticed. A space easily ignored. A space that required attention to question. The thought formed slowly, reluctantly. If Tina had never left the house, then the house had kept her. That idea settled heavily on the investigators, pressing against everything they thought they understood. They did not yet know what lay beneath their feet. They only knew that the silence they had mistaken for emptiness might have been something else entirely. Outside, life continued as it always had. Cars passed, neighbors waved. The house blended in, unremarkable, patient, holding its secret without complaint. Inside, beneath the stairs, time had stopped, and the truth waited. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. By the time investigators returned to the house with renewed purpose, the air inside it felt different. Nothing visible had changed, yet something unseen had shifted. The rooms seemed smaller, tighter, as though the walls themselves were aware they were finally being questioned. David Satchwell watched calmly as officers moved through the space. His posture was relaxed, his voice steady. He answered questions the same way he always had, with a politeness that bordered on detachment. If he felt fear, it did not show. If he felt guilt, it remained carefully contained. But pressure has a way of finding its way into even the most controlled spaces. The questions came slower now, more deliberate. Investigators no longer rushed to fill silence. They let it stretch, watching how David responded when there was nothing to respond to. They noticed the way his eyes drifted toward certain parts of the house without intention, how his answers circled rather than landed. The stairs drew their attention again. They were unremarkable in every visible way. Carpet worn thin at the center, wooden edges dulled by time. A structure designed only to support movement, to carry people upward and never invite curiosity below. And yet, something about them refused to release its hold on the investigators' thoughts. They began to imagine the space beneath, not as empty, but as intentionally forgotten. A warrant was granted. The house, which had quietly guarded its secret for years, was about to be opened fully for the first time. The excavation began without drama. No shouting, no urgency, just careful movements and measured breaths. The sound of tools touching the structure echoed too loudly in the confined space, each scrape and tap magnified by tension. David stood nearby, watching. He did not protest. He did not ask questions. He did not look away. As the flooring beneath the stairs was lifted, the room seemed to hold its breath. Dust rose gently into the air, settling on uniforms, on shoes, on skin. Time slowed, stretching each second into something unbearable. And then, they found it. The moment did not arrive with shock. It arrived with stillness. Human remains, hidden carefully, deliberately, where no one thought to look, where footsteps passed above every day, where life continued unaware. The silence that followed was absolute. Officers froze, their training momentarily undone by the weight of what they were seeing. Some closed their eyes, some stared too long, no one spoke. There was nothing to say. Tina Satchwell had been there all along, not lost, not wandering, not starting over somewhere else. She had been beneath the stairs of her own home, while years passed above her. The emotional impact rippled outward, touching everything it encountered. Investigators felt it. The house seemed to feel it. Even the air grew heavy with grief. This was not just a discovery. It was a realization so cruel it bordered on unbearable. Friends had stood in that house. Family members had walked those floors. David had lived his life above her, day after day, step after step. The remains were treated with reverence, carefully uncovered, carefully removed, as though gentleness might make up for the years she had spent unseen. David was arrested without resistance. As officers placed him in handcuffs, his expression did not change. There was no breakdown, no confession in the moment, only a quiet acceptance that the performance was over. The house emptied quickly after that. It no longer felt neutral. It no longer blended in. Its silence now screamed. News spread through the town like a shockwave. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People stood still as the truth sank in. The horror was not just what had happened, but where it had happened. Beneath the stairs, a place everyone had passed without thought. For Tina's family, the truth arrived like a blade and a bomb at once. The hope they had carried was finally forced to rest. The questions that had haunted them for years found their answer, but the cost of knowing was immense. She had not left them, she had been taken from them. And justice, when it finally came, felt painfully late. The house would never forget what it had held, and neither would anyone who now understood how close the truth had always been. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. Truth has a weight to it. When it finally emerges, it does not rush. It settles slowly, pressing down on everyone it touches. After Tina Satchwell was found beneath the stairs, the world did not explode into chaos. Instead, it grew quiet in a way that felt heavier than sound. The house was sealed, emptied of its ordinary life, furniture removed, curtains drawn back, rooms stripped of comfort. What had once been a home became a place of evidence, of measurements and documentation, of careful steps taken by people who now knew exactly what they were standing above. David Satchwell was taken away without drama. There were no last words shouted, no sudden confessions, no visible collapse. His silence followed him, unchanged, as if it had always belonged to him. Investigators would later describe him as emotionally distant, controlled to the end, a man who believed that silence could protect him even after the truth was uncovered. In court, the facts were laid out piece by piece, timelines rebuilt, lies exposed gently but firmly. The calm explanations David once offered were now stripped of their usefulness, reduced to contradictions and omissions. What had once sounded reasonable now sounded rehearsed, hollow, and deliberate. Tina was no longer just a missing person. She was a woman whose life had been taken, whose body had been hidden, whose absence had been mistaken for choice. Her name was spoken again and again, this time not in whispers or speculation, but with certainty. For her family, the courtroom was both unbearable and necessary. They listened as details emerged that no one should ever have to hear about someone they loved. Every fact was a reminder of years stolen, of moments lost, of hope that had been carried far longer than it should have been. Grief changed shape for them. The uncertainty that once haunted their days was gone, replaced by a solid, aching truth. Tina had not abandoned them. She had not chosen silence. She had been silenced. That knowledge hurt deeply, but it also brought something else with it: validation. The waiting was over. The wondering could finally rest. David was found guilty. The verdict did not feel triumphant. Justice rarely does in cases like this. There was no sense of balance restored, no feeling that something broken had been repaired. There was only acknowledgement, only truth. Outside the courtroom, the world continued as it always does. People walked past the building without knowing the weight carried inside. Cars moved through intersections. Conversations resumed. But for those who had followed Tina's story, nothing felt the same. The house was eventually sold, renovated, changed. New people moved in, unaware of every detail but aware enough to feel something lingering. Walls were repainted, floors replaced. The stairs remained, though altered, no longer unnoticed. Yet even as the house changed, the story did not fade. Tina's name became a reminder of how easily assumptions can replace investigation, how silence can be mistaken for innocence, how ordinary spaces can hide extraordinary harm. Her case forced questions that extended far beyond one home, one town, one crime. How many disappearances are explained away too quickly? How many signs are missed because they do not look dramatic enough? How often do we believe calm voices simply because they do not disturb us? There is no answer that brings comfort, but there is responsibility. Tina Satchwell was not defined by how she died, but by the fact that she mattered enough for the truth to be pursued, even years later. Her story became a warning written in quiet tones, reminding us that justice delayed is not justice denied, but it is always justice diminished. In the end, the house gave up its secret. Silence lost its power. The truth rose, as it always does, no matter how deeply it is buried. And Tina was finally seen. If her story unsettles you, that is not an accident. It is a reminder. Stories like this are told not to satisfy curiosity, but to keep memory alive, to ensure that absence is questioned, not accepted, to make sure that silence is never mistaken for peace. Because some secrets do not belong beneath the stairs, they belong in the light. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel.